I'm Danny. I'm a palmist. That gives me about as much street cred as a used car salesman or maybe a snake oil salesman or a pickpocket or something. But anyway, I'm here to tell you about reading hands and making meaning out of marks. Oh, I'll press it myself.
Oh, I'm
so for about 200,000 years, the only thing on telly was the sky at night and nature and other people's bodies. And we got really good at reading all of those things, really good at astronomy, really good at herbalism and understanding meteorology and animals and those kind of things, and also understanding each other's bodies. And some of the first prints that we've made in our history are of hands. If you go back about 40,000 years, the first painting on a cave wall is a red dot. And then 39,000 years ago, we were already making hand impressions. As soon as we learned how to blow paint down a bone, we were already taking impressions of our hands, maybe because it's easy, but you could also be doing it in leaves. You could also be doing it with tusks, all kinds of things, but we weren't. We were doing it with hands. So we've been interested in hands for a very long time, yes. And the Vedic tradition goes back about 3,500 years to this book, the Samudrika Sasra, the teachings on signs and interpretation of signs, making meaning out of signs. Mudra means sign, so you'll be aware of mudras, like Hindu gang signs, basically. And the signs on the body are something we've been reading for ages, particularly the Hindus. There's divination of the marks on the lines of the face. There's a divinatory system directed at the belly buttons of women to see what kind of wives they would make. Yeah, you can tell all sorts. And in fact, in traditions all over the world, there's palmistry. The hand has thought to be meaningful as to what's going on underneath. In Mesoamerica, the Egyptians have a tradition. The Chinese have a really interesting tradition, which is much more geared towards symbols on different mounds. They're quite a pictographic people. There's a European tradition. A lot of it's to do with the lengths of the phalanges as your aristocrat is waving at you from their carriage, right? So each culture brings its own particular feeling to how we read palms. So next slide, please. And we're going to be talking about fingerprints today. Our fingerprints are how we manipulate the world, and they're also how we engage with the world, how we feel our way around the world. So they're super important in our everyday life. And this is, next one. These are the developments of apes down towards, or monkeys down towards apes, down towards man over here. So there's a few things which you see emerging out of the primate hand into the human hand. One is the increasingly longer first finger. There's no monkeys, there's no apes which have a longer first finger than third finger, but in humans, 1 in 10 people has a longer first finger. And palmists see the first finger as to do with the self, to do with consciousness, to do with individuality, and all these things that emerge as we emerge out of the collectivism of the apes. But another thing, and also obviously the thumb comes around into full opposition to the fingers, which is also quite interesting because the thumb is about your will, and human beings are the only ape, in fact the only animal where your will can go completely against the rest of the organism. There aren't other creatures that go on hunger strike, for example, to make a point. But one of the other things is the loop, or rather the whorl emerges, and we're going to talk about how that's formed in a while. But just for now, in the monkeys, those prints, their loops, see how it looks like a wave there on the left, are nearly all monkeys have those. You get to gibbons, and you've got a few whorls, a few of these round ones. Orangutans have some, gorillas have some. When you get to chimps, it's 20 to 30%. When humans, it's 30 to 35%. So 1 in 3 of the prints is a whorl, which is quite interesting. From a palmist perspective, obviously that means something, but even the scientists are catching up with this now. So we're going to have a brief look at some of the scientific findings, right? Today's session is about finding meaning in marks. Yeah, finding significance. And scientific significance is quite different to other forms of significance. We talk about historical significance of palmistry, then it's something, or we talk about how palmist reads meaning, but scientifically, significance means if you run this experiment a whole bunch of times, how likely is it that it happens again? This is a very, very blunt way to study anything, actually. But even with these very clumsy, the clumsy tool of science, the scientists are still beginning to catch up with what the Vedic scientists knew a long time ago. So, for example, correlations between loops and whorls in and the Myers-Briggs personality types. Namely, the more loops you have, the more moderate your personality is. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Myers-Briggs. Right, so I'm going to say a bunch of letters now. The INFJ, the ENFJ, the ENPF, the E, I feel like a madman. I don't know what these things mean, but they are correlated to different personality types. The more loops you've got, the more moderate you are in your personality, and the more, next one, the more whorls you have, the more leadership you'll have in your personality, particularly these traits are a strong sense of responsibility, enthusiastic attitude, and concern for others' well-being. Now, this is a fairly blunt instrument. All you're doing is counting the loops and the whorls. So how do those things form? When a bunch of cells that's going to be a baby finds its way into the wall of the uterus, it splits up over the first 3 weeks until you get to this point where you have 3 different parts or 3 different sets of cells, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, and each one of these are going to develop into different parts of the embryo and different parts of the baby. And the ectoderm is what develops into both the nervous system and the skin. So the folds on your fingers, they're called papillary ridges, and the folds in your brain come from the same embryonic set, and they start to develop around the same time. And at between 10 and 12 weeks, you start to produce these things they're called volar pads, and they're on the end of your fingers, all of them, and sometimes you get them in other places as well, on the hand and on the toes, and they grow out like this, and then the amnion pushes in like this. And just like when a balloon shrinks, it leaves wrinkles in its skin, as the volar pad shrinks, it also leaves wrinkles, and those wrinkles become your fingerprints. So the fingerprints become a record of the human being's first interactions with its environment, which is the amniotic fluid. So, the whorls that we've been talking about, and some of you have seen the whorls in your own fingers. If the volar pad and the strength of, let's say, life force and growth is pushing out evenly in all directions against the amniotic fluid is pushing back evenly, you're going to end up with concentric circles, right? Because of the way it is pushed out. That tells us something about how much force is in that particular finger. Whereas, looking at this one, if the volar pad grows out and then the amnion kind of pushes it to one way or the other, you're going to end up with this loop print, right? So remember back in the last slide, we were talking about how the more moderate personalities have these loop prints, and the more forceful personalities are more likely to have these whorl prints. So you're already seeing this in a particular finger if someone's got force, more or less force in it. You've also got other types of fingerprints. We're going to talk briefly about the arch. So the arch produces a flatter pad which doesn't go out so far, so it kind of raises and then it goes down again as well. This is all completed by the 24th week. So this is a slightly more sophisticated test. It was on depression. I'm going to wave at Ollie with my hand. So what happens here is looking at the right thumb, yeah? Comparing a group of depressed people with a group of not depressed people. You are more likely to have whorls. Sorry, the depressed group is more likely to have whorls in the thumb. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Yeah? And as you can see, the control group is more likely to have loops in the thumb. So that's statistically significant. It's also meaningful in other ways, but we'll get to that in a bit. If you look at the right index finger, however, so not the thumb, but the index finger, it's the other way around. So the control group is more likely to have whorls than the depressed group. You see, it's the other way around, right? So isn't that curious? And next slide, please. Arches is the other way around, right? So the depressed group is much more likely to have arches in the first finger. Now, the arch print is, I don't want to say it's a weaker print because the arches also have their own qualities, but it doesn't push out with a great deal of strength. And people with arches, particularly in their first finger, because the first finger is about the personality and the self, it's Jupiter in palmistry, they are much more likely to get, well, they're more supportive, they're more helpful, but they're more likely to get stepped on. And if it's in your left finger, then in your relationships, you might well get stepped on. Next slide, please. So from a palmist perspective, the Jupiter finger is to do with the self. And when that's a teacher wagging a finger, that's a student going, I know, which is the finger we raise when we are talking about what we know. This is the one which grows as the humans emerge out of the apes. And it's to do with your self-worth and your status. So going back to that slide there, the non-depressed group is likely to have a whorl in that finger. Doesn't that make sense? If you've got more power in the status-giving finger, the expansive finger of Jupiter, Jupiter's the king of the gods, then you're more likely not to be depressed. I guess the point I'm making here is that the language of the gods and the language of palmistry is so much more refined than this clumsy language. Next one. In terms of the endocrinology, it's also quite interesting. The first finger grows under the influence of estrogen in the mother's womb. So I'm not going to talk too much about that today. I've got a whole other talk about that. And emotional awareness. The longer your first finger gets, by the way, the more likely you are to be schizophrenic as well. Whereas the longer the third finger, we'll get to the third finger in a second. So things like consciousness and individuality and what's my place here and all those things that mess with your head can drive you mad. The thumb, however, is about the will. So when we say, yes, I agree, no, I don't agree, if you're under somebody's thumb, you're subject to their will. Egyptian palmistry focuses mainly on this digit of the thumb. The thumb is really important. And in this group, the depressed group is more likely to have whorls in the thumb, right? If you have a strong will, i.e. if you want something a lot, then you're more likely to get depressed because it can be troublesome to want something and then be frustrated you don't get it. Now, a palmist, obviously more sophisticated, is also going to look at the size of the thumb. So if you have a long thumb and a strong thumb, you're more likely to get what you want. If you have a stiff thumb, then you're more likely to get what you want. If you have a floppy thumb, you're going to be easily led. And you're going to, oh, I was meant to be doing my taxes, but now I'm at a party. If you've got a really stiff thumb, you're going to be stubborn. And all of that correlates to the levels of cortisol, the levels of estrogen that are influencing how your ligaments are tightening up and loosening up as well. Next one, please. No, it's given up, is it? There you go, thank you. The ring finger is connected to Apollo. We'll just go through this one really quickly. It's connected to your drive, your creativity. There's quite a few, I saw a few whorls in the ring finger. People with whorls in the ring finger, or even peacock's eyes, are going to be quite creative and productive. Next one. The longer this one gets, the more likely you are to end up in prison, the more likely you are to have more children. All the things connected to high levels of testosterone, because Apollo, or rather testosterone, influences the growth of that finger. And the middle finger, well, so if I say I know, and it's just me, then I'm going to raise one finger. But if I'm a priest, I'm going to raise two, because that is me, and that's also the institution of Saturn, which is around me. And the Saturn is traditionally connected to morality, limitations. Academics tend to have long, strong Saturn fingers, long, bony fingers. It's pituitary hormones. And pituitary, growth factor 1 and 2, influence the growth of bones, but they also regulate estrogen and testosterone on both sides. And Saturn regulates the things on both sides. It's also about circadian rhythms, menstrual cycles. We have been showing our middle finger to people to limit them since way before Eminem. Nero made people kiss his middle finger. Next one, please. Right, so there's tons of these papers. I'm not going to go through them. I just want to draw attention to two. This one here, which is about correlation between IQ scores and fingerprint types. And this one, which is fascinating, machine learning models successfully differentiated schizophrenia fingerprints with high accuracy. That means you can put a bunch of prints into a computer and it will be able to tell you which of these people are likely to be schizophrenic. Next one. So as I said, statistical significance and the science around it is, I mean, it's kind of interesting, but it's not as interesting as palmistry. If you were to take a book and chop it up and then analyze how many times it said the word punch, and then look at the literary supplement which said what it's about, and you were to say that a book that says the word punch is more likely to be about boxing, you would get some statistical significance, but that doesn't mean any meaning, right? So this is how palmists work. I want to tell you about a couple of different conditions that I've seen, just to show you how we all put it together. I went to read at Bizarre But True, which is a pub in the, what's that place called? St Andrews Mews? And 9 people came in. The publican said, there's a palmist today. And I said, yeah, and I'll tell you who's the bossiest and who's the most perverted. And they were utter skeptics, but they had a few drinks and they called me over and I said, okay, you're going to be out 2 minutes, all right? And I said, notice how I gesticulated with me and my assassin finger. Yeah, so I said, the first person I read had a very long first finger. I said, this is the bossy one. They all laughed, she was. We went all the way around, and I didn't tell them who the most perverted was, but they asked me. That perverted person had, in their left hand, the left is your intimate life, they had a peacock's eye, which is the weird one, on that finger. The reason we wear, this is your intimate creativity. The reason you wear a wedding ring on this finger is because it's about your intimate creativity. If you've got a peacock's eye on that finger, you're probably going to have a bit of a kink going on. But in his right first finger, he had one of these, a double loop, a yin-yang, so he's trying to fit in, right? So there's a person who's not going to reveal his quirks very much. A Whorl on the little finger is always, they're going to have wild dreams. Let's skip over that one. And then the last one is peacock's eye on R4. Which one's that? Well, I'll tell you briefly about mine. I've got a Whorl on my first finger, which means I'm very happy talking up here to all of you people, because it's the public side. But I've got an arch on my left finger, so I wouldn't be quite so tough in my own house. All right, next one, please. And that's the last one. Oh, we've got to do this again. So I'm just going to finish off by saying I hope that's been exciting for you. I hope I've redeemed palmistry a little bit. This is me. Those are the books I forgot to bring here and sell. And if you want to know a talk about endocrine function and finger length, it's that one. This is a completely different thing. I'm also a hypnotist, and that is a free hypnotic session that takes you down into the mycelial web. So if you want to have a quick look at that, I've also got my cards back on that table. And thank you very much.